also helped form the global studies concentration that we have here as well. And today we're going to have a talk by Josh Kessler, who recently was informed that he has gotten a tenure track position here in Japanese as recently as Friday. So let's all give him a round of applause for that. So Josh is now a full-time tenure track instructor here at Green River. Before receiving this position, he did freelance translation for close to 15 years. He's worked closely with our department for 11. He was an adjunct instructor before he got full-time, and now he has a tenure track position. Also, he lived in Japan, where he taught English and studied Japanese full-time. He completed his MA degree at San Francisco State University with a major in teaching Japanese as a foreign language. Since becoming a full-time instructor, he also has completed the ACTFL Oral Proficiency Summer Institute, American Council on Teaching of Foreign Languages, Oral Proficiency Interview. He has received Open Educational Resource Grant from Faculty Excellence. He helped in creating the Global Studies concentration. A lot of his classes pertain, so if you're taking Japanese, you might want to look into the Global Studies concentration. He's also in the process of creating an Asian Studies concentration, a global film series, a humanities course on anime, and he specializes in marginalization in Japan. When does Josh sleep? That's my question. So let's give a great, big, warm welcome to Josh Kessler.
はい、じゃあ皆さんこんにちは。こんにちは。英語で、話しますのでちょっとオークワードなんだけどお願いします。So I put together a short presentation about one of the probably lesser known atrocities from World War II, which is the internment of Japanese and Japanese Americans. I'm sure most of you have at least heard of this. It tends to kind of get lost in the shuffle, obviously because of what happened with the Nazi death camps, but it's something that I think deserves attention. I think it does get attention, but I wanted to kind of maybe shine a spotlight on it a little more for those of you who maybe don't know a whole lot about it. So first I wanted to explain this. This is a piece of 3D art that I did when I was in university. It was one of the only projects that I did that I was kind of like halfway proud of. So this is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother. These are my two aunties, and this is my mom. This was taken in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, so they were interned. Okay, so I had kind of a connection with this. And what this is an intaglio. It's basically like a print, okay? It was a photograph that I transferred to print form. I framed it and then I wrapped it with barbed wire to kind of symbolize the entire ordeal, and you can see that right here in this image here. Okay. So we're going to actually go back to 1192. So we're going to go back several hundred years. Starting in 1192, Japan was ruled by basically the samurai. You know who the samurai are, right? Okay. It was a military government. Okay. And there was an emperor, as you probably know, but the emperor was basically just a figurehead. He didn't really do much. It was the samurai, the shogun, the samurai leader, who had all the power at the time. The emperor was just kind of there. Okay. That's kind of important to keep in mind. So we're going to flash forward to around the 1630s. Sakoku. Have you guys heard of sakoku? This was basically an isolation policy that the military government at the time said, okay, we're going to do this. We've just come out of hundreds and hundreds of years of fighting, 100 years of civil war. We want to keep the peace. We don't want any outside influence. So we're just going to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. And that's basically what Japan did for over 200 years. And that's called sakoku. Literally translates to closed country. So this is basically the idea. Okay, you have foreigners who want to come visit Japan, want to trade with Japan. Japan says, no, go away. Some of the lowlights include the banning of Christianity. Does anyone know what this is? Or can tell me what this is? This is actually called a fumie. Basically, the authorities used this to determine whether or not someone was a believer in Christianity or not. They basically put this thing on the ground and they said, step on it. Okay. If they didn't step on it, they said, okay, you're Christian, get out. Either imprisonment or, in some extreme cases, execution. Okay. So Japan was not very open to outside ideas at the time. Okay. Although initially they let it into the country, but eventually they thought, okay, this is going to be a threat to our peace, so goodbye. Okay. No traveling abroad, no trips abroad, no one in or out. Portuguese, who first arrived in 1543 and brought with them Christianity and guns, which was a game changer in battle, they said, get out. Okay, we don't want you here. Then we're going to fast forward to this guy, Commodore Perry. His full name is Matthew Perry, not that Matthew Perry. Different Matthew Perry, looks very different. Okay. So in 1853, President, I believe Fillmore was the president at the time, he says to this guy, you're going to go to Japan and you're going to open them up to the rest of the world, you're going to make them trade with us. So he takes his gunships to Japan, arrives in 1853, basically says, okay, you're going to open up to the rest of the world. We'll give you a year to think about it. If you don't open up, when I come back next year, we're going to basically shoot you. Japan says, okay, I guess we have no choice. We let them in. Okay. So you can imagine what these ships might have looked like after 200 years of pretty much no outside influence. All of a sudden you have these giant black steamships entering Tokyo Bay. Okay. So that happens. After that, though, so who was in power? Who had the actual power at the time? Just Shogun, the warriors, right? The emperor doesn't really have any feasible power at this point. This kind of exposes a crack in the armor, if you will, of the samurai rulers, of the military government, in that, okay, they let this outside influence into the country. Not everyone liked it, okay? So this was a very popular mindset, okay? Since the military government has done such a poor job of protecting Japan from outside influence, let's bring back the emperor. Okay. This is the mindset. Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. And this is called son no jōi in Japanese, for those of you who care. Son no jōi. Okay. As we'll see later, this part kind of goes away. Okay. And this image, I think, really reflects that perfectly. They have a sumo wrestler knocking out the evil, Western, hairy barbarians. Okay. And then this mindset culminates in the overthrowing of the military government in 1867. Emperor is restored to power in 1868, hence the Meiji Restoration, and the Meiji Emperor was the name of the emperor at the time. Okay. And this starts a lightning-fast process of modernization and westernization. Westernization, which is interesting because they wanted to get rid of the Western influence, but they ended up welcoming it. So we're going to skip ahead to a couple of very important documents that really establishes imperialism in Japan. First is the Meiji Constitution. These are a couple of the highlights, if you will. Article 1, the emperor or the empire of Japan shall be reigned over and governed by a line of emperors unbroken for ages eternal. So many Japanese people believe that the emperor is actually a descendant of Amaterasu, the sun goddess, i.e. a living god. That's important to keep in mind. Okay. The emperor is sacred and inviolable. The emperor has supreme command of the army navy, declares war, so he can basically do whatever he wants, in a nutshell. Second, very important document, Imperial Rescript on Education, also 1890. You could almost consider this as being like, what did we have to say when we were kids? Face the flag, put our hands on our heart. What was that we had to say again? I pledge allegiance to the flag, blah, 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 blah. This is kind of similar. And I think, I'm just going to read this. ye are subjects. Be filial to your parents, affectionate to your brothers and sisters as husbands and wives. Be harmonious as friends true. Bear yourselves in modesty and moderation. Extend your benevolence to all. Pursue learning and cultivate arts, and thereby develop intellectual faculties and perfect moral powers. Furthermore, advance public good and promote common interests. Always respect the Constitution and observe the laws. Sounds pretty good. Last part, not so much. Should emergency arise, offer yourselves courageously to the state, and thus guard and maintain, be quiet, the prosperity of our imperial throne, coeval with heaven and earth. This is the important part. Okay. Fight and die for your country, fight and die for the emperor, no matter what. Okay. And this little thing here, which kind of looks like a miniature shrine, jinja. Okay. Inside, you'd have, so you have one of these on like high school campuses, school campuses. Inside, you would have an image of the emperor and the empress. Every time you walk by it, you're required to bow to it. Okay. You can imagine if we had like a photo of Trump somewhere and he had to do that. No one would do that, I don't think. Aggression. Okay. So we're going to skip ahead to 1931. This is the year that many consider to be the start of the Pacific War. Okay. Mukden incident. Have you guys heard of the Mukden incident? Does anyone know what this is about? So there's a memorial to this in Mukden. Mukden was the then capital of Manchuria. You've heard of Manchuria, right? Basically the puppet state created by Japan. Okay. So basically, Japan was a tiny country, not a lot of resources, overpopulation. Japan needed more land, they needed more resources, so we'll just take it. Okay. So kind of like what our friend Matthew Perry did back in 1853, he pointed guns at Japan and said, open up your country, force, okay? Japan kind of takes that same mindset. We're going to just take what's ours, okay? So basically, so before this, I should backtrack. Japan won 2 wars. They defeated the Chinese in the Sino-Japanese War. They actually ended up fighting 2 wars with China, win both times. And then they beat Russia in war as well, in the Russo-Japanese War. That is what really puts Japan on the map. Okay, like, whoa, this tiny little country can defeat Russia? Whoa. And as part of the loot, they received part of Manchuria, and they received part of a railway. So basically like railroad tracks. So what Japan decides to do is they say, okay, we're going to blow up a section of these tracks, and then we're going to say that the Chinese people did it, and then we're going to attack the Chinese. I think that's called a false flag, if I'm not mistaken. So that's what they do. Okay. Interesting. Has anyone heard of this? The Nanjing Massacre. This is one of the most underreported tragedies of the entire war. Okay, this takes place in 1937. Okay. The then capital of China, Nanjing, was taken over by Japan. They were really just basically like locusts. So they start in Japan. Obviously they start through, we haven't even talked about Korea yet. We're not going to have time to get to Korea, but sweep through Korea, sweep through Manchuria, and they kind of come all the way down through China. They really were like locusts. Okay. So after the city falls, maybe just because they were bored, or maybe because they just wanted something fun to do, they kill, rape thousands and thousands of civilians. Okay. Supposedly the number is 300,000. This is the monument. Okay. Not a lot of people know about this. People need to know about this. Okay. And I have a really short video clip about this that I want to show. I am going to be showing a couple of clips as we go, and I do want to warn you that some of the images will be rather graphic, so just to warn you. Okay, this is just like a 2-minute clip. And this is about the Nanjing Massacre.
From December the 13th, 1937 to February 1938, the Japanese troops slaughtered over 300,000 defenseless Chinese, most of them civilians. The scale of the atrocity shocked the world.
南京真心时候，我才11岁。
Yu Changxiang is one of the few survivors. The path under our feet is a mass grave. It's his father's final resting place.
他这个
Yu Changxiang's father's name is carved on the wall of the memorial site.
我自己亲眼看到日本人杀人。
The killing happened every day, every minute, every second. My mother and I were hiding in the basement for weeks, and when we came out, everyone we knew was killed. As for my father, I didn't even know when or how he was killed. All I saw was that the bodies were piling up everywhere in the city.
This is the surviving footage of the Nanjing massacre. The man who filmed it was John McGee, an American missionary who stayed in Nanjing after it fell to the enemy.
Japanese soldiers.
At the end of the Second World War, he testified about the massacre at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East.
The killing began immediately in several ways, often by individual Japanese soldiers or up to 30 soldiers together going about, each one seeming to have the power of life or death. And then soon there was organized killing.
That kind of goes on. So why are all of these Japanese soldiers into all of this? What gets them involved in this? Why are they willing to do all of this, supposedly for the emperor? Education, okay, / I'll add parenthetically, brainwashing. Okay, I'm going to read a really short excerpt from this book called The Pacific War by Saburo Ienaga. If anyone is interested in the Pacific War, I highly recommend this book. I will warn you though, it does not pull any punches in terms of Japan's role. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. So this is, sorry. Oh, the microphone. Sorry, I forgot about the microphone. Sorry, I got so into it, but I forgot. So just to give you a little illustration of what was being taught in school, and this is an elementary school. The war and patriotism were to be stressed in every subject. In ethics, the teachers were to discuss the meaning of the imperial edict declaring war, the imperial edict on the course of the war, the exploits of valiant Japan and our valiant military men, the special behavior expected of children during the war, and the duty of military service. Japanese language classes were to study the imperial edicts related to the war, articles about the war situation, letters to and from soldiers at the front. Teachers were to use war-related pictures provided by the government to spark discussion. Arithmetic classes were to do calculations about military matters. Topics for science were general information about searchlights, wireless communication, landmines and torpedoes, submarines, military dirigibles, shimose explosives, military carrier, pigeons, heavy cannon, mortars, machine guns, the Arisaka cannon, and military sanitation. Physical education would include character training and war games. Music classes were to reverberate with war songs. The objective was to militarize the entire curriculum. The impact on the children was soon apparent. Consider a third-grade student's composition. I will become a soldier and kill Russians and take them prisoner. I will kill more Russians, cut off their heads, and bring them back to the emperor. I will charge into battle again, cut off more Russian heads, kill them all. I will be a great man. Elementary school student. And this is just a map that shows, okay, so here's Japan. Tiny, tiny little country, okay? Remember the thing I said about how they're like locusts? This is basically what they did in like 5 or 10 years. This was their entire sphere of influence. In kind of a sick way, it's impressive, okay? But you figure, you got a lot of stuff like what's going on in Nanjing, happening all around here, Philippines, Indochina, okay? They were close to Australia, didn't get there. They were close to India, didn't get there. Okay, but they had plans, okay? Has anyone heard of Unit 731? No. If you have a strong stomach, look it up. Okay. Biological Warfare Research Facility in Manchuria. Okay. This is a shot from a History Channel documentary run by this pleasant-looking fellow. Okay. He got the idea of capturing anyone who he could get his hands on, Chinese, Russians, POWs, doesn't matter, and then basically testing on them. Okay. Like frostbite, you know, how much could a body take? Testing the effect of shrapnel injuries, purposely infecting people with diseases and then opening them up while they're alive and awake to see what happens. Comfort women, have you heard of this? Okay, yeah, well that's good that some of you have heard of this. Okay. Sex slaves. Okay. Women from territories that Japan basically took over said, okay, we're gonna kind of lie to you guys and say we're gonna give you jobs, and basically you're gonna be gang raped on the battlefield over and over and over. Okay. Now these two topics are really touchy ones. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of the history textbook controversy that's going on in Japan and still sort of going on in terms of like whitewashing, things like this. Okay. I also wanted to share just a couple of sentences from an article called What Japanese History Lessons Leave Out. And this is from a student who studied, a Japanese person who studied in Japan, obviously in high school. And this is about the history books and how much of what we have been talking about is in/not included in these textbooks. There was one page on other events leading up to the Sino-Japanese War in 1937, including one line about the massacre that took place when Japanese forces invaded Nanjing, the Nanjing Massacre or Rape of Nanjing. There was another sentence on the Koreans and Chinese who were brought to Japan as minors during the war, and one line on comfort women, a prostitution corps created by the Imperial Army of Japan. So, and also I'll add parenthetically, there was also just one sentence on the atomic bombs. I found that to be kind of interesting too. Okay. So a lot of people in China and Korea obviously are upset about this. How Japan is kind of not necessarily acknowledging what happened, and some right-wing Japanese people deny that any of this happened. We're not going to talk about Pearl Harbor because everyone knows about what happened at Pearl Harbor. So we're going to skip ahead to the Battle of Midway, 1942. This is where everything starts to go south for Japan. Okay, does anyone know what happened at the Battle of Midway? And what happens to the Navy of Japan? Basically decimated. 4 giant battleships taken out. Okay, so they were getting a little too big for their britches. Okay, they thought they could move on Midway, but they got hammered for that. Then we're going to skip to 1944, 1945, the B-29 bombings. I think people tend to forget about this. A lot of the attention goes to the atomic bombs, and obviously they deserve a lot of attention. But these were really bad too. Okay. A couple of really short video clips about the B-29 bombings.
When we got over the target, it was like 1,000 Christmas trees lit up all over. And you could feel the heat when you're there, and you could smell the smoke and the stench of human and animal flesh as that city is being consumed by millions of fires all over. And they can't extinguish them. It's awesome. It's awesome.
The next night, LeMay was shown the photos. An aide remembered a full minute of silence. All this is out, LeMay then said, running a hand over several square miles of Tokyo. This is out. This. It's all ashes, another general said. All that, and that, and that. LeMay's B-29s had flown far below the jet stream, too low for the heavy anti-aircraft. His gamble had worked. The military targets were gone. As many as 100,000 civilians died that night. No bombing raid in the war had been more destructive.
One of the first extensive uses of napalm in battle. You all know what napalm is, right? I'm going to try to tweak the volume here really quick because this is kind of soft. One other really short clip.
16 square miles of Tokyo lay in ruins. 267,000 buildings, about 1/4 of the city. We don't pause, LeMay would write, to shed any tears for uncounted hordes of Japanese who lie charred in that acrid-smelling rubble. The smell of Pearl Harbor fires is too persistent in our nostrils. He ordered more raids. On Nagoya, with its huge aircraft plants. Osaka, with its shipyards and steel mills. Kobe, Japan's major port. Back to Nagoya. I thought it would be possible, he later recalled, to knock out all of Japan's major industrial cities during the next 10 days. LeMay never got the chance. He ran out of bombs.
You know, when you kill 100,000 people, civilians, you cross some sort of moral divide. Yet, at the time, it was generally accepted that this was fair treatment, that the Japanese deserved this, that they had brought this on themselves. I mean, these are easy and simplistic wartime rationalizations. In retrospect, though, some divide had been crossed. Civilians were now fair game.
This is the great escalation in the air war. It's a lot easier once you've incinerated 100,000 Japanese in Tokyo to drop an atomic bomb that's going to kill less than that on Hiroshima.
Interesting. Ran out of bombs. So that's where it gets tricky, because when you kind of take into account what Japan had been doing throughout Asia, it gets a little bit trickier. How, justification. And then, of course, the aforementioned bombs. We're not going to spend a ton of time on these because I'm sure you guys know a lot about these, but really, really quick video clip.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
Something else that people don't or tend to forget. So August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. August 9th, 1945, Nagasaki. August 8th, I believe, Russia declares war on Japan. So these three giant things happen basically in a matter of days, and that is finally what ends the war. Okay. So this is a political cartoon from 1942. I'm going to give you guys maybe like 30 seconds or a minute. I kind of want to make this a little bit interactive. Try to kind of figure out what's going on with this cartoon. Once again, this is from 1942. If you've seen this before and know the author, don't give it away, because it's kind of an interesting little thing. So maybe take a couple of seconds, see if you can figure out what's going on here. And this is 1942 after Pearl Harbor. A few seconds. This says waiting for the signal from home. Washington, Oregon, California, honorable fifth column, if anyone knows what that is. So any thoughts on what's going on here?
Yeah, they're the troublemakers, and they need to make their way out of this country, because if they collectively get together, they may help overthrow America.
Yep, that's right. Key word, they may. So who are these people? Japanese Americans. How can you tell? They're all wearing glasses, their eyes are all like this, buck-toothed. They're all basically wearing the same thing. They all look exactly the same. Does anyone know what a fifth column is and can explain what that is? Does anyone know? Aaron, do you know what the fifth column refers to? Because I think it came up in the Spanish Civil War. Well, it refers to a group of people in an enemy nation, let's say, who are going to cause all sorts of trouble. Okay, sabotage, espionage, stuff like that. Okay, that's what the fifth column refers to. So this was sort of the mindset of many people in the United States, in particular on the West Coast. Pretty much all of it unfounded, though. But the paranoia of wartime. Okay. Oh. Really? The style looks familiar, right? And I thought, whoa, I didn't know he did stuff like this. What happened to the Cat in the Hat? Yeah. This is, I think, years before that, though. This is probably where he cut his teeth as an artist in political cartoons and, what's the word I'm looking for? Propaganda. Okay. So keep in mind that this is the mindset of many people at the time, justified or not. So these are three people who many consider to have played significant roles in the internment of Japanese. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. Their little mini descriptions are up there. More importantly, I wanted to read another little article for you. This was actually in the Seattle Times, January 30th, 1942. Henry Macklemore, have you guys heard of Henry Macklemore? So the title of the article is, "This is War, Stop Worrying About Hurting Jap Feelings." Okay. Speaking strictly as an American, I think Americans are nuts. 24 hours in Los Angeles have convinced me of this. We are at war. California is our key state, not only because of its airplane industry, but because its shores offer the most logical invasion point. So what does the government do about the tens of thousands of Japanese in California? Nothing. The only Japanese apprehended have been the ones the FBI actually had something on. The rest of them, so help me, are as free as birds. There isn't an airport in California that isn't flanked by Japanese farms. There is hardly an airfield where the same situation doesn't exist. They run their stores, they clerk in stores, they clip lawns, they are here, there, and everywhere. You walk up and down the streets and you bump into Japanese in every block. They take the parking stations, they get ahead of you in the stamp line at the post office. They have their share of seats on the bus and streetcar lines. Keep in mind that many of them are actually American citizens. Okay. And we're going to skip ahead. I am for immediate removal of every Japanese on the West Coast to a point deep in the interior, which was an idea that basically this guy thought up of. And this guy recommended to this guy. And this guy said, we should do this. Okay. Sure, this would be, I don't mean a nice part of the interior either. Herd them up, pack them off, and give them the inside room in the Badlands. Let them be pinched, hurt, hungry, and dead up against it. Sure, this would work in unjustified hardship on 80% or 90% of the California Japanese, but the remaining 10 or 20%, I'll add parenthetically, probably more like 0, have it in their power to do damage, great damage to the American people. They are a serious menace, and you can't tell me that an individual's rights have any business being placed above a nation's safety. If making 1 million innocent Japanese uncomfortable would prevent one scheming Japanese from costing the life of one American boy, then let the million innocents suffer. Another kind of a tightrope you don't want to walk on. And this is the actual order, Executive Order 9066, February 19th, 1942. So this is just like 2 months after Pearl Harbor. Okay. And I think this is before the Battle of Midway, so this is before Japan's downfall. Okay. Have you guys read or heard of a book, When the Emperor Was Divine, by Julie Oldschool? I think she actually was on campus a few years ago and spoke about this book, if I'm not mistaken. It does a really good job of illustrating the entire experience. It's a really short read too, so it's not like overly long. It's really, really good. I recommend it. I'm going to be inserting quotes here and there because they do a really good job of illustrating the process. And I'm just going to read this. Tomorrow she and the children would be leaving. So this is after they get the order that they have to leave. She did not know where they would be going or how long they would be gone. She knew only that they had to go. Okay. So imagine that if you're all of a sudden told that you have to leave your home and you're going to get put in a train and you don't know where you're going to go. And you basically have to leave everything you have in your life behind. Okay. Quick propaganda video, which awkwardly tries to justify why they're doing this. Okay. Keeping in mind that political cartoon that we looked at earlier. I hope this isn't going to be overly loud.
There were more Japanese in Los Angeles than in any other area. At nearby San Pedro, houses and hotels, occupied almost exclusively by Japanese, were within a stone's throw of a naval air base, shipyards, oil wells. Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants. So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. But of course, this limited evacuation was a solution to only part of the problem. The larger problem, the uncertainty of what would happen among these people in case of a Japanese invasion, still remained. That is why the commanding general of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland. Immediately, the Army began mapping evacuation areas and for a time encouraged the Japanese to leave voluntarily. But trouble for the voluntary evacuees soon threatened in their new locations. So the program was quickly put on a planned and protected basis. Thereafter, the American citizen Japanese and Japanese aliens made plans in accordance with orders. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Civilian physicians made preliminary medical examinations. Government agencies helped in 100 ways. They helped the evacuees find tenants for their farms. They helped businessmen lease, sell, or store their property. Now, this aid was financed by the government, but quick disposal of property often involved financial sacrifice for the evacuees.
Okay. So this is an image of Bainbridge Island, and this is a shot of Japanese getting on a train, okay, being told to go. Okay. This picture crushes me every time I see it. Cutest little girl in the world, and she's wearing like a tag, like a suitcase or something. You know, gonna be sent off somewhere. So before they were actually sent to the internment camps, Japanese Americans were sent to what they called civilian assembly centers. This is one that's under construction in Pomona, California, for those of you who know where Pomona is. These are on the fairgrounds. This is where my grandparents were sent to first. Okay, they were sent here. They were lucky in that they didn't have to live in a horse stable like some had to live in. Okay. Oh, and I wanted to read another little excerpt for you. My mother actually wrote a story based on conversations that she had with my grandmother about her experience. And she does a really good job of describing what the conditions were like in the Pomona camp. My mother described Pomona camp as very hot, dry, and dusty. Their room was far from the toilets and laundry room. My sisters were 1 and 2 years old and still in diapers. My mother hadn't been born yet, so there was a lot of laundry to do. Also, they were tiny and could not be left alone. Mom says she couldn't even go to the bathroom when she wanted to. The place was full of flies. Luckily, she had mosquito netting before they arrived, so my sisters could be protected while they napped. Mom said it was a really hard time for her, and this is just the first step. And this is the Civilian Assembly Center on the Puyallup, I can never say it right, Puyallup Fairgrounds. Okay, so if you didn't know, that was one of the assembly centers. Okay. Transportation from these assembly centers to the camps themselves was mainly by train. So just another really short clip. This is the last clip, I promise, about the transportation, all that.
Meanwhile, in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and elsewhere, quarters were being built where they would have an opportunity to work and more space in which to live. When word came that these new homes were ready, the final movement began. At each relocation center, evacuees were met by an advance contingent of Japanese who had arrived some days earlier and who now acted as guides. Naturally, the newcomers looked about with some curiosity. They were in a new area, on land that was raw, untamed, but full of opportunity. Here they would build schools, educate their children, reclaim the desert.
That's funny, isn't it? All that opportunity out in the desert. The train was old and slow and had not been used in years. Broken gas lamps hung from the walls, and the locomotive was fueled by a coal-burning boiler. Some of the passengers were sick from the uneven rocking of the cars, and the crowded compartments smelled of vomit and sweat. 3-4 days on a train like this, with the shades drawn. And I want you to take a look at this, just a few seconds. This isn't one of the trains going to the internment camps. This is a train going to a civilian assembly center, but it's basically the same thing. Just take a few seconds. I want you to really look at the expressions on their faces and kind of process them as you will. Okay. These kids. Yeah. And then the internment itself. So they call them relocation centers. We can call them concentration camps. There's 10 of them. Probably the most famous one is Manzanar. You guys have heard of Manzanar, right along the Sierra Nevadas in California. And this is where my grandparents were, Heart Mountain, okay, Wyoming. Something that I had forgotten, for those of you who are familiar with California, so there's 395, like if you're gonna go to Mammoth or wherever to go skiing or whatever, you go up here, and then you have the Sierra Nevadas here. This is where Manzanar is, and interestingly enough, it's in a town called Independence. It's like a bad joke or something. So we're going to go on a really quick photo tour brought to us by Ansel Adams, famous American photographer. Okay. So we'll just go through these quickly. So these are shots of Manzanar. Okay, so just to give you an idea of the climate, freezing cold, snow in the winter. Boiling hot, obviously, because it's the desert in the summer. Okay. Mostly, though, they waited for the mail, for the news, for the bells, for breakfast and lunch and dinner, for one day to be over and the next to begin, over and over and over and over for years. So this is the chow line. They had like a little shop where you could buy stuff. Okay. Baseball, anyone? They had their own newspaper. Okay. There were opportunities for employment. My grandfather worked on sugar beet farms, picking sugar beets for years. Okay. That's how he saved up money. Okay. Some grew crops, some raised livestock, pigs, chickens. So the Japanese were very resourceful. It's the old, given lemons make lemonade thing. Shot of a family of 3 in their room. Children being educated. And you had births, of course, okay, happening in the camps, one of which was my mother. And this is her. And this is my grandmother. She died when she was 95, just a few years ago. She had a really long, full life after all of this nonsense. So this is my aunt, Sally, and this is my other aunt, Judy, when they were like 3 or 4 years old. You can see kind of the desolation around here. There's just nothing. Here they are again. My grandmother made all their clothes, by the way. And this is Sally. She broke her arm, and so she's hanging out there with her arm like that. Okay. Statement of United States citizen of Japanese ancestry. So basically, the U.S. Army wanted more fighters, more soldiers. And they thought, oh, maybe we could draw upon all of these Japanese Americans who we imprisoned. In order to figure out who they could trust, they had Japanese people fill out this really long ancestry survey thing. These were the 2 really big, most controversial questions. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces whenever ordered? Will you swear allegiance to the United States of America? People who answered yes, they figured, okay, if they volunteer, we can take them. Okay. People answer no, not so much. Okay. So you actually had full-blown Japanese-American army. Okay. Probably the most famous is the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Has anyone heard of them? One person has. Okay, that's better than none. Okay. They were one of the most highly decorated units in the entire army. Okay, they rescued the Lost Battalion. They're called the Lost Battalion of soldiers. I think it was like 200 from Texas. They were basically surrounded by the Germans. I think this was in, I can't remember if it's France or Italy. Was it France? So they basically rescued them all by themselves, of course taking heavy casualties. And then a detached unit from the 442nd is the 552nd, and they actually helped to liberate one of the death camps, Dachau. I think that's how it's pronounced. So I think we need to show them a little love. Okay, even though they were imprisoned and their families were imprisoned, they still fought for their country. Okay. There were 2 Supreme Court cases that led to the closure of the camps. Interesting that the first one actually said that removing the Japanese from the West Coast was okay, but that putting them in prison wasn't. And this was the one that kind of changed everything. Okay, now it's time to close the camps. Okay, the war isn't over, but in around 1944, the camps start to close. Okay. Problem is, what do they do now? Okay. Well, the government gives everyone $25, says, go home, good luck, have a great life. $25 to start over. Okay. And I think that may or may not have included train fare, I don't remember. Jeez. This is the actual paperwork, or a scan of the paperwork that my grandmother got. So a family of 4 got $126. $128? $128 to start over. But fortunately, my grandfather worked really, really hard, worked his fingers to the bone in those sugar beet fields. He was able to move to Cleveland, where he worked at a bakery, and then they moved to California in 1946. Were able to get a house and were able to start all over. was amazing. $25, we later learned, was the same amount given to criminals on the day they were released from prison.
Wow.
But generally, you know, prison is kind of close to where they live, not in the middle of the desert. And then, 40 some odd years too late, we have the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which acknowledges, okay, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Here's $20,000. Yeah. I don't know.
Better than $25.
Considering a lot of the people who were in prison maybe were no longer with us or really, really old, kind of too little too late, but take what you can get, right? I'm sure you've all heard this quote before. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, or we're heading that way, with a certain someone on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So, yeah. That's basically it. For those of you who want to find out more, so the book on the Pacific War that I read from, as I said, it's not for the faint of heart. So much so that he was basically, the author was basically, a lot of his books were, I can't even think of the word in English now. I can't think of the word. Censored. Because they were so, you know, like especially the stuff about Unit 731 and the comfort women. Okay, so he sued the Ministry of Education and eventually won, but it was a long, hard battle. I mentioned Julie Olska's book, and then Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet is another very good book by Jamie Ford. I found it particularly interesting because it's set in Seattle, which I thought was kind of cool. Although it's more about, it's kind of like a story with the backdrop being the internment of the Japanese. Those still very good. So that's those. And then other media that I would recommend. There's a really good documentary about the Nisei soldiers. It's on YouTube. I didn't know the year. There was no year, hosted by Gerald McGreeny, of all people. It's very interesting. The two clips I showed you about the bombings of Tokyo are from Victory in the Pacific. This is also a very good breakdown of the Pacific War. Okay. The thing about the atomic bombs that I showed, the clip I showed, is from an HBO documentary called White Light, Black Rain. Not for the faint of heart. Okay. They spent a lot of time on the aftermath, which obviously nobody considered at the time. For those of you who like Japanese dramas, there's one called 99 Years of Love. Terrible title, but it's a very good show. Japanese Americans, about the internment. It's done very, very, very well. It's long though. It's like 10 episodes or something, but it's very, very good. Kind of hard to find though. There's a DVD about Heart Mountain. So this is the internment camp where my grandparents were sent to. And you know who this guy is? George Takei, Star Trek fame. Okay. He gave a very moving TED Talk in 2014. So he was interned with his family also. So if you want kind of a more sort of personalized snapshot of the whole experience, he gives you a very good one in a TED Talk. And then this is the original picture of my grandparents, and then my mom, and then my aunt, and my other aunt, and that's all I got.
Okay, so we'll open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions for Josh, I can pass you the microphone.
A couple things. One's just an acknowledgement of a movie and a book. It's Snow Falling on Cedars, David Gooderson.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, Snow Falling on Cedars captures what happened on Bainbridge Island.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so it's very contemporary. I mean, it's very relevant to all of us here since it's right in our backyard. And the other question I had for you, Josh, was who brought that case forward against the Supreme Court or against the court system about to bring an end to the camps?
Oh God, it was. I think his name was Fred Korematsu.
Unfortunately, how it's going to have to go.
Yeah, his name is Fred Korematsu. I don't remember the specifics of the cases, but if you search Fred Korematsu and then ex parte endo, you can read about it. I don't remember the specifics of the case right off the top of my head, but those were the two cases that kind of got the ball rolling in terms of closing the camps.
Yeah, just so I'm thinking of all the Japanese that were interned. It must have been a good guy out here, from outside the Japanese Japanese race that said, hey, this is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those camps that you were talking about that they took the Japanese American people to, that pretty much looks like a Holocaust. So they could work and all of that there, but did they have to do something more like slavery-ish, like the Holocaust?
No, they got paid. They got paid. I mean, probably not a whole lot, but they got paid.
Really crappy living conditions.
So
Yeah, they got paid, and obviously they weren't executed. There was no genocide, fortunately. But yeah, they were allowed to leave camps and work, and as I said, that's how my grandfather saved up the money to move my family and eventually buy a house. So yeah, I guess there was a little bit of opportunity in there after they took away everything first.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay, so I'd like to thank Josh Kessler for presenting today. That was an excellent, very balanced, very historically framed presentation. I also invite you to the 9th Global Talk. This is the 8th Global Talk out of 9 Global Talks. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again next year. It gets us out of the United States and gives us more understanding of global narratives and how they're connected. So hopefully you can make it to the first Tuesday in the River Room. We'll have Christine Dixon, an eruption of evidence about El Seren and El Salvador. So let's give him one final round of applause. That was amazing.